Okay, so this is not meant for, in fact, if you see the question and answers that we had, the email that we had, I had mentioned that, we would be doing it. So if you're starting your prep, if this is probably the first few weeks, or you have been doing GMAT on and off, but don't really know how to approach GMAT, this session would give you an overview of the test and give you some basic guidelines, how to prepare, what are the mistakes that people typically do when they are preparing, and so on, right? So hopefully this session is useful for perhaps more of beginners, but it could also benefit people who are already into prep, because apart from the obvious, I'm going to share certain insights into what the test is, what is it that I've learned over the last 15 years that I've been teaching this test, right? So without much ado, let's get directly into it. A couple of ground rules before we get started. So make sure that we keep the session organized. The session will go up till 12 noon, right? So here is a request, and just a general piece of advice to all the participants. See, many times what happens, I think the bane of modern life is that we tend to multitask. We think we are very efficient if along with the webinar, I'm going to open another window where I'm going to, send out a couple of emails. I'm going to check Facebook, and along with that, the webinar is running in the background. You essentially are not going to get 100% out of any of those, right? So on the GMAT, would you be, focused on the task at hand, or would you be checking Facebook? Right? If you're not going to be checking Facebook on the GMAT, which very obviously is the case, then my suggestion, whatever I'm going to tell you today, trust me, it's distilled advice which would otherwise take many hours of your time. So I'm distilling it for you. So in the next 1 hour or so, I'm going to give you enough information that would otherwise take you maybe 10 hours to search on the net, right? So my suggestion, be focused, just have this window open, close all of the other windows, okay? And don't worry, this webinar is also available as a recording. However, the Q&A, so I'm going to spend a lot of time today doing Q&A, right? So let me just show you where the Q&A is. So there is, if you see, there is a Q&A button, which is different from the chat button. So the chat button is where we were earlier. So chat button is over here. I'm going to type hello. So this is a chat button. If you want to type something, go ahead and type it. I will not be answering questions over here. This is more in order to ensure that we all are communicating. But the Q&A that you see is where you need to post your questions. Make sure when you're posting your questions, try to be as elaborate as possible, okay? Because a lot of times, if I don't understand the question, if it is going to be like a how to improve verbal, I cannot explain how to improve verbal in, let's say, in a 1 minute response, correct? So try to keep the question specific, right? I will be stopping at various intervals during the webinar, and I'll be taking your questions, answering those questions, and moving on, right? So that's pretty much the setup for the ground rule. Yeah, one more important thing, in case you see a lag, in case you're not able to hear me, I would wait for at least a few more people to face the same problem, correct? But if you're the only person facing the problem, the chances are the problem is at your end, not mine, okay? Really a couple of things. One is, so for checking internet speed, I don't know, a lot of people use various things. I use fast.com, right? So fast.com is serviced by Netflix, right? Very simple UI, very simple interface, very quickly gives you just one metric that you need to know, which is your download speed, right? It doesn't tell you ping and latency and upload speed and all that. It just tells you what's your download speed. The browser opens up very quickly. So make sure you check the internet connection at your end. If it still doesn't fix, maybe you can log out and log in back again, all right? As I said, what we are going to do today, the agenda for today is to take you through what I would consider as the core essentials. Okay, think of this webinar as the basics of GMAT, things that I wish, like a lot of people would say, things that I wish someone had told me before I started my prep. Okay, so this is really my advice to you on the do's and don'ts, on keeping you on the straight and narrow, because many a times what happens is, despite the best of our efforts, right, the desired results don't come through. Has it happened to you? Has it happened that you've been practicing, and somehow you feel you're stuck in a rut? Your scores are not moving up, right? And you just feel, frustrated. Well, usually what happens is people tend to look at the their performance as a direct correlation of effort. Correct. So if I were to ask most people, this is how they tend to look at the GMAT preparation. So they think that, yeah, yeah. So they think that GMAT is this, kind of. Once again, I'm just trying to figure out. There is. Just 1 second, please. I'm just trying to get the pen working over here. So the pen is kind of giving me a problem over here. So let me just try to draw it with the mouse. So people tend to think that, time and scores have a linear proportional, right? So what it means is, as you prepare more, as you put in more effort, your scores keep going up, right? It's not true. Right? Anyone who's been preparing for the GMAT will probably vouch for the fact that it's not true. Eventually, sooner than later, you will realize that your scores are actually going to go something like this. Right? It is going to plateau at some point. So it is not a direct correlation of your effort. So I'm going to throw some light into why this happens. What is it that you probably need to do in order to overcome that, and so on, right? So hopefully that's something that we address. A little bit about myself. My name is Arun. I'm the founder and CEO of Crackbubble, and I've been teaching students at Crackbubble for the last 13 years. In fact, 12 years. 2006 is when I started, but overall, I first got into the GMAT space about maybe 14, 15 years ago. So that's a long time, right? Anybody who's been doing anything for that long, ends up getting to know something more than the superficial layer, correct? So I think one of the reasons why my messages perhaps resonate with the students is because I don't talk about it as a test. I think I tend to delve a little deeper. I like to look at the psychological aspects. I like to look at, things that impact your performance on the test day. What are those factors? How can we maximize? So I get a lot into psychology, because I'll tell you one mistake or one common, misperception that people have is, as a GMAT instructor, it's very easy for me to go and say, oh, study for 3 hours a day, okay, and do that consistently for the next 3 months. Look, if I'm able to study for 3 hours a day for the next 3 months, then there is really no problem in life, correct? The problem is, how do I do it, right? How do I take out time? How do I really do it? More importantly, how do I go in the right direction? Like I was telling earlier, right, it's not just effort. Correct? So let's say that you're running in the wrong direction. If you're running in the wrong direction, many times what happens is you'll realize that putting in more effort is just going to make you run faster and faster, but in the wrong direction. Correct? So you need to make sure that you are oriented in the right direction, that and effort. Many times what happens, people think it is only effort. It's not only effort, it's also important that you have the right direction, right? Just a trivia fact, I was in software, and this is something that I've been, telling whoever is willing to listen, that, I ended up, doing coding. I ended up being in the technology area, and a lot of you who want to do a GMAT just because they want to do something different. They are sick and tired and bored of their jobs. Well, I hear you, okay? But in my case, I ended up, doing entrepreneurship and starting out Crackbubble. So it's just that one of those things that people think that I started my career as a teacher. I didn't start. In fact, neither my experience nor my education has really prepared me for a career in teaching, right? I have a master's in computers. I worked as a delivery manager for a CRM product company, right? So a very, very different world from where I come. But my passion has always been teaching. My passion has always been mentoring students, which is why I'm here today on a nice Saturday morning, right? So just quickly checking it, Akash, you have already asked this question in the Q&A, so I'll be getting to the Q&A. So don't worry, please don't post it again on chat. Q&A is fine. Rahil, I just saw your message, but I assume everyone else is able to hear me. So by that token, I would imagine the problem is at your end, not at my end. All right. And there are people who are raising their hands and all that. I don't even know how it works. So please, don't raise your hands. I don't know what to do. Just go ahead and write it in the chat window, or if you have a question, post it in Q&A. A bit about Crackbubble. So really, Crackbubble started in 2006 as a part-time venture. So I actually started it part-time, and I did that about 5 years. So people who talk about entrepreneurship and say, oh, entrepreneurship, like overnight, this guy started a company, and, it doesn't work that way. It's a lot of hard work. So along with my full-time job, I used to teach part-time. I used to do sales. I used to do marketing. I used to do operations. All my students had my personal number, but those were different days, right? So I used to have a handful of students every month. Then, I plunged into it in 2011. So yeah, we've been around for about 12 years. Looks like a long time. But really, if you were to ask what has been unique about our journey, right from day one, what we have avoided is we have avoided telling students that there is an easy path, right? We have always encouraged students to score as high as possible, right? I've always told, try to get to a school which, is as good a school for you, right? Never shortchange what your dreams are, right? We don't have any tie-ups. I don't have a college in US which is going to pay me money, right? If you get admission. So we don't work in that model. So our success comes really when students pick a choose, get a great GMAT score, apply there, get in, sometimes with scholarships. So that's really been our story over the last few years, right? Coming to a couple of free resources in case you're not aware of it, the GMAT online trial course. So make sure you if you have not done that already, you can go ahead and check up some free videos that we have put up in the trial course. There is no credit card, anything required. You can just go ahead and access it, and you get access to a bunch of free videos that I have shot, and also there are some quant videos. There are also a bunch of ebooks in our ebook library. So, you might want to have a look at specific sections over there, right? And then we have our YouTube channel. So in case you have been following on in case you have been following us on YouTube, you probably see that we post a lot of videos. In fact, just last week, we had posted a couple of videos on the new GMAT format, right? So make sure that you go ahead and, look up all the resources on YouTube as well, right? Cool. So with that out of the way, let's get started, okay, with the first thing. And so those who have come in late, the Q&A is, please do not flood the Q&A by asking questions that could be asked in the chat window. The 3 questions that I currently see are great questions. If you have any questions, keep posted. If you're not able to see anything, please post it on the chat window, okay? Similarly, Himani, I'm just giving an example. Don't put a question in the chat window because I'm not going to be able to see it. So unfortunately, I would not be able to answer your questions. Please put it in the Q&A window. All right, good. So I'm actually taking this text from mba.com, right? Again, people are raising your hands. Please, I would not know what to do. If you're going to raise your hand, use either the chat window or the Q&A box, all right? So this is text from mba.com, right? The GMAT exam is a standardized assessment delivered in English that helps business schools assess the qualifications of the applicants for advanced study in business and management. Okay. Now, let's try to understand what GMAT is trying to say over here, right? So it says it is a standardized assessment, right? So it's important that you understand what is standardized. Delivered in English, I don't need to say GMAT is offered in just one language, right? Which is English. But the key is it's a standardized assessment. What is the meaning of standardized assessment? Standardized assessment as opposed to a test which has standards. Okay. So CAT, there is a standard format. Okay. There might be a standard pattern. But CAT is not a standardized test. It's very important that you understand this. GMAT is a standardized test. GMAT is a test where you would be scoring anywhere between 200 to 800. Okay? You can score anywhere between 200 to 800, right? And GMAT has a algorithm, okay? And it uses this algorithm, and it's a very, very finely calibrated algorithm. Okay, so I'll be talking about the algorithm. I'll talking about the testing pattern shortly. But remember that it's a standardized test. If you ask me, apart from this word standardized, if you ask me really, I've had students who have done well on the GMAT verbal, and they have come and asked me, Arun, what was the whole point? Why did I need to do all of it? And then I tell them that, look, if you look at both your MBA, correct, your B school, or if you were to look at life after B school, let's say you're an investment banker, product manager, or a consultant, right? A lot of what you're going to do in business, and I want all of you to understand this, right? Because all of you are preparing for a career in business. A lot of your time is going to go into reading stuff. Do you agree? A lot of it is going to go into just reading stuff. You're just going to figure out, okay, how do I go about solving questions, right? How do I go about reading stuff? Now, what happens is when you read so much, right? Are you going to just regurgitate in front of your boss or in front of people who are looking at what you're doing? No, you cannot just go and say, I read this site, I read that site, I read this white paper, I read that white paper. People are expecting you to read all of that and give them a gist, give them a summary of what you just read. Now, the whole point is, if you're going to give a summary of what you read, you cannot go into a mode where you're trying to remember things. You are going to get into a mode where you're just going to scan the whole passage, just get an idea of what things are where. What is this? This is nothing but reading comprehension, correct? So reading comprehension is very crucial for your existence, right? In the business world and in, business school also. Now, think about it. You have read all of it. You have created a gist of it. Is that all you're supposed to do? Can you just walk away saying, "Arey, ye sab padh liya, abhi uska this is the, the summary of what I read"? No, people are not going to let you go, right? People are going to say, well, can you tell me what are the inferences I should make, right? Now that you've figured out this thing, does it hurt my cause? Does it help my cause? What are the conjectures I can draw? What are the assumptions you have made? What are the possible flaws in the argument? All of this is critical reasoning. Very, very important for your post, MBA, or rather your MBA and the post MBA journey, right? So the CR skills that you're learning, the critical reasoning skills you're learning is crucial, right, to do well in real world. So when you're learning CR, don't learn CR to solve a question. Learn CR thinking you're developing a skill. You're developing something that will help you both in business school and in your job post that. Then think about it. All of what you read, you created the gist, you are able to draw inferences and conjectures, but what is the most important thing that is going to help you succeed in life? The most important thing that is going to help you succeed both in B school and in life is going to be your ability to present it. How do I present it in the best possible manner, in the most clear and concise manner that is able to convey my point clearly to the other person? That is sentence correction. I've had people who get into consulting 2 years, 3 years, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and they come back and say, my bosses are grammar Nazis. When I create a report at McKinsey, each and every sentence, I'm checking for misplaced modifiers. I'm checking for pronoun ambiguity. I'm checking for parallel structures. And these are students who have, taken the GMAT like 4 years, 5 years earlier, right? And they come back and they say, when I was preparing for the GMAT, I had no idea that these are real life skills that I would be using in, both B schools and in life beyond that, right? So I just want you to understand that, you ought to look at GMAT not as a filtration mechanism, as an elimination process. Think of it as, real world skills. Learn those real world skills that you can hopefully apply, even after. All right. Now, coming to the GMAT test structure itself, right? Just want to make sure that all of us understand so that we can make sure we get it out of the way, okay? So the first thing that you need to understand here is there are 4 sections, right? So there are 4 sections. The first section, or not the first section, but you have one section which is integrated reasoning. If you know data interpretation, it is the same as DI. 12 questions given in 30 minutes. Out of those 12 questions, randomly 8 questions will be chosen, and your score will be on how you performed in those 8 questions. Let's say you got 6 out of them right, you will get 6 out of 8. All right? AWA, you have one essay. Again, you're going to get 30 minutes. Depending on the quality of your essay, it can be rated from 0, which means you did not even attempt it, 1, which means you wrote something incoherently, all the way up to 6. Which means overall, you presented a very logical argument. These schools today have, by the way, IR and AWA will always come together, okay? So you'll have AWA and IR coming together. So whenever you're attempting anything in the test, consider this to be a section. So this, I'll put it as section. I'll just give it a number 1. Then you have quant. So the new timings and the new questions. So now today there is no difference in the scoring, just the number of questions have been reduced. So you now have 31 questions that you are expected to solve in 62 minutes. All right, which gives you about 2 minutes per question. Quant is scored out of 51. Okay, so that's the thing with quant, it's scored out of 51. Now let's get on to verbal. Same thing, it's out of 51, but the difference over here is verbal is 36 questions and you will be given 65 minutes for it, right? Now there is a particular thing on the GMAT, so it's called section selection order. So what happens in section selection order is, let us say I call this as section 2, okay, and I call verbal as section 3, correct? So we have section 1, which is AW and IR. You have section 2, which is quant, and you have section 3, which is verbal. You can take the test in 3 ways. The first way you can take it is 1, 2, and 3. This was the conventional way to take it. First you take AWA, then you take IR, then you take quant, then you take verbal. Okay, option number 1. Option number 2, you can start with quant 2, then you can take verbal 3, then you can take IR and quant, which is the last section. Or you have a third option. In that third option, you start with verbal, you go to quant, and then finally you take IR and AWA. You can take any of this. I'm just going to label it as A, B, and C. You can take any of these section orders for your test. I'll just get a little into the pros and cons. Now let's look at the configuration A. I start with AW and IR, then I go to quant and verbal. As I said, for a long time, GMAT did not give you the flexibility. This flexibility was introduced fairly recently. It was introduced last year. Before that, it was always 1, 2, 3. AWIR, quant, verbal. Advantage, disadvantage, advantage. When you start the test, there is a lot of inertia. Your brain is little dull, in some sense, it is not, getting into that cruising speed. Okay. Think of it as a car in the morning, right? You're trying to start, and the engine is getting warmed up. So taking AW and IR upfront gives you the momentum, gets your brain working so that you can attack quant and verbal when you are like really in the zone. What is the disadvantage? Disadvantage is, well, by the time you get to verbal, you are tired, correct? So a lot of people complain that, well, when I start AWIR, I'm doing very well. By the time I come to verbal, I'm so tired, I'm not able to focus. That's the flip side. Let's take the second one, 2, 3, 1, which is you do quant first, then you go to verbal, then you go to AW and IR. Advantage is if
it's 11 o'clock.
Is your main section, if that is your section that you want to, that you think you're really good at, then what happens? You start off with a very good opening. Think of it as a cricket match, right? You want to put your best player up in the order, right? So you have, Kohli coming in 1 down, right? Though he didn't perform well, but the idea is your best batsmen come, they are given more balls. So quant, once you start off with an advantage, the idea is you put yourself in a positive mind space. What is the disadvantage of this? The disadvantage of this is, if quant is still your, key area, right? And verbal is where you probably need to spend more time. Then by the time you come to verbal, maybe, even that 1 hour of quant may take a toll on your mental energy to some extent. A lot of times students have said that, in quant, the first few questions, because they are gunning for a 50-51, it gets very tough because they're getting the first few questions right. And then, it's very hard to maintain time, right? But I would say, depends on how you look at it. The third option, third configuration, start with verbal. Advantage very clearly. Verbal, you're going in with your 100%, mental capacity, mental strength. You're fresh, correct? What is the disadvantage? What is the flip side? Same thing as I said in the second configuration. People have said, Arun, I started off verbal, question number 4, I saw a reading comprehension passage. I just was so slow because my brain had not, warmed up enough, like the example that I gave earlier. So you try it out on a couple of tests, see what configuration works. I personally don't suggest any configuration as such, but if you were to ask me, I would probably pick between B and C. And I'll tell you why between B and C and why I'm not a very big fan of the first configuration. It is because really IR and AWA, you don't need to really spend a lot of your energy. I think if you are able to do justice, you are able to get a 50-60 percentile. As of now, B schools have not really shown a requirement that I want, a 6 in IR or a 7 in IR or in AWA. They just want like minimum cutoff, like you get somewhere around the 50th percentile. They are more than glad to take that, right? So, which is really what it is. Let me just go and look at some questions, see if there are any questions. Anisha Sachdeva, there is a sectional cutoff in GMAT like CAT. There is no sectional cutoff per se, okay? But the whole idea is that these schools would want to see how you have, how you have done with regards to, the score. So they don't want that you did not attempt. They don't want that you get a 0 in any of the sections, right? So they want to make sure you're done reasonably well in all the sections, okay? Okay, so Avijit has this, I've been preparing my scores, getting 40, 45, okay. So Avijit, my suggestion is I will get into details. This is too complex a question for me to really answer. correct? Because what you're saying is, I need help on RC, right? This is, you can understand this is a more generic forum. I'm trying to give them, a larger aspect of what GMAT is. I don't know what is CRID. Maybe you can just go ahead and mail the prep team, right? So just go ahead and please mail the prep team, and I don't know what is the CRID reasoning, but whatever it is, just mail it. We will see if we can actually add it onto the course. The rest of it, our questions, I'll come back to a little later. So I just had, Parikrit, don't. So just one more request, please don't put questions in Q&A, which otherwise would be in the chat, okay? Because I'm spending time on the Q&A. I don't want just people just asking questions. I'm just wanting to make sure only valid questions here. So please a request. Sanya Arora has a question. Has the composition of each section changed? That is the weightage to different topics with the new timing. Sanya, we believe the weightage, or I don't know what you mean by weightage. You're talking about the distribution of questions, right? We believe the distribution of questions has not changed, okay? We believe it has not changed. We believe that roundabout you're going to get similar kind of questions in all the three areas. So, you don't need to worry too much. There is some information that I have. I'll probably share it with you a little later. Okay. So let's get to the next part. Okay. Okay. So now, if you were to look at it, the GMAT timing, right? You have 62 minutes in quant. You have 31 questions, which gives you about 120 seconds per question. Similarly, in verbal, we have 65 minutes. That is 36 questions. And, there is really not much that really has changed. Okay. So you pretty much were getting a similar time in the previous test also, when you had 75 minutes and excuse me, 41 questions in the case of verbal and 37 questions in the case of quant. Okay. Now I'm just trying to see if this, actually what is happening is I have a pen, right? So I write with this pen, and I think just today, some configuration setting problem, I'm not being able to use the pen. So I'm sorry, I'm going to use, excuse me, the mouse. And I hope, excuse me, I hope it's not too messy. Okay. Now, what we always believe is maintaining 1 hour, like timing over 1 hour, can be very hard. So in quant, for example, I know I have to spend only 2 minutes per question. That much I understand. But when do I check? Do I check at question number 10? Do I need to check at question number 20? Do I need to check at, what are the questions? So what I would suggest is, I would probably suggest a very simple way to kind of go about doing this, right? The way I would probably try to keep the time strategy is, I would break it into 4 parts. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, instead of looking at it as, I'm talking about verbal now. Okay. So instead of looking at it as 65 minutes, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to look at it as 17, 16, 16. So the timing, you can split it into 4 quartiles of about 16 minutes each. I'm just adjusting the first, quarter into 17 minutes instead of 16, because we have a total of 65 minutes. If it had been 64 minutes, I would have given you a very nice 16, 16, 16 wala distribution. Okay. Now, in this, what you're supposed to do is, you're supposed to do 9 questions each. This is verbal. I'm talking about the questions you need to solve and the time you have. So the first 9 questions, you basically solve it in 17 minutes. Then you solve 9 more questions in the next 16 minutes, 9 more questions in the subsequent 16 minutes, and 9 more questions, the last 9 questions in the last 16 minutes. Okay. When it comes to quant, okay, same thing. So I'm going to distribute it this time around. I'm going to give the timing as 17, 15, 15. So I'm going to give 17, then the rest of them are 15 minutes each. So I'll just do 15, 15, and 15. See, why I'm telling you this is because, and I want all of you to make a note of it, okay? Because see, you really are not going to be able to manage the entire 1 hour. So many times what happens, students come in and they say, oh, I'm going to somehow crack this whole thing by, just getting and doing, brute force. Don't do brute force. Just think through, okay? So I would probably solve, 7 questions in the first 17 minutes, followed by 8 questions in the subsequent 15 minutes, correct? So I'm giving myself slightly less than 2 minutes per question, which obviously is getting compensated in the first quarter, where I'm giving myself 17 minutes to order 7 questions. So just make a note of it. It's there. We have, in fact, we got a blog on this last week. So in case you have checked the blog, this is information that I've shared over here. Okay. All right. So any questions on the timing? So Sanya had a question. Is it possible to share the importance weightage? There is nothing like importance and weightage, Sanya. I don't know where you have got this misconception from, but on the GMAT, we need to focus on pretty much all the topics. See, if you're gunning for a score of 50, 51 on quant, or you're gunning for a high score on the GMAT, then you cannot afford to leave any topic, correct? So my suggestion, don't worry about this importance, weightage and all that. Assume that all questions are important, correct? And try to practice across it. You will typically get a distribution. So the distribution that you're going to get will be, I will talk about the distribution shortly, but you don't need to worry about weightage, okay? There is one more question Sanya had, but doesn't the difficulty increase with every question? Shouldn't we keep less time for the first few? Good question, Sanya. In fact, that's a great point. What I would suggest is, yes, I know that, but the deal is difficult questions don't always take more time. You have to understand that if I were to put it just as a theoretical thing, I would say, yeah, you should probably, spend equal time or maybe more time. But when you take the test, and anyone who has taken the GMAT, anyone who's taken even a practice test will vouch to this fact that when you actually start off, okay, you will realize that the first few questions, it is very hard for you to make, educated guesses, right? And I'm talking about human behavior, correct? It is very hard for us to, really get into this mode where we say, hey, you know what, let me just go ahead and make a guess. You will find yourself making guesses more towards the end, right? Which is why I'm actually apportioning a little bit more time at the start than at the end. All right. Avik Datta, how now to get more than 40? How many questions can we do wrong? Avik, I had an answer for this some time ago, but with the new test, I would not know. Okay, because the new test with the number of questions being reduced, I think we have to wait for a little bit more for the new GMAT preps to reflect it. So once we get that, we will be able to answer that. But right now, we don't have an answer. Ankit, for me, speed has always been an unsolvable. Ankit, speed, I mean, this is a slightly generic question. I'll try to get to this a little later, okay? Joman Joseph, does room for error in quant reduce with the new format? Considering, yes, Joman, I would say the room for error has gone down with the new format because there are fewer questions, correct? And the algorithm is going to get more sensitive, which means you can't afford to make as many mistakes as you made when the test had 37 questions. So definitely yes, but how much, we don't know, correct? So that's the key, we don't know how much. So that's pretty much, I'm just looking at, yeah, we are hoping that it comes in. They have actually promised a date for changing the GMAT prep software, which they are now renamed as Exam Pack. So that will come, possibly before 30th, because on the website they are saying that we will release it before 30th April. We don't know whether it's going to be on 16th April, correct? A lot of you are asking very complex questions. Just to kind of give you a heads up, this is again going to be a very basic GMAT, introduction to the GMAT thing. So many of these questions are slightly complex. Let me see if I can answer them towards the end. All of you understood the GMAT timing, correct? So I wanted to make sure you understand what the GMAT is testing you. Quick recap. Second, give you an idea of the test structure, what are the various section orders that you can use. And the third thing, the overall GMAT timing for quant and verbal. IR and AWA, don't worry about timing. Quant and verbal is what you need to. Okay. Now coming to understanding the adaptive algorithm and understanding how it works. So just one request for everyone, like for example, Parankit Balyan is asking a question on chat. If others who know the answer, if you could respond to it, it'll just help me. So all of you know that this is recorded. We'll be putting it up on YouTube. So the answer is yes, you will be able to see the first half hour of the seminar, okay? Now, let's understand how the GMAT algorithm works, correct? A little bit more into this. So let me kind of take So what I'm doing is I'm just giving you a very basic way in which the GMAT algorithm works. So let me just go ahead. Where is it? Yeah, the whiteboard. Okay. So let's assume that I'm just going to give you a very simple example. So let's assume that there are two people taking the test, right? So let's say that we have A and B taking the test, right? So A takes the test and B also takes the test. The way GMAT works, and I'm keeping it very simple, the way GMAT will work is GMAT says, look, there are three things that could happen over here, okay? So the three things that could happen over here is for any bucket of questions, and I'm going to, for the sake of convenience, let me just give you some buckets, okay? Now, GMAT algorithm, okay, is such that it goes for each section between 6, which is the lowest possible score, and it goes all the way up to 51, which is the highest possible score. Both verbal and quant are out of this range of 6 and 51. Okay. Now, let's assume that, and again, keeping it very simple. So let's assume that there are these ranges, and I have a range of, let's say, 600 to 650. Let's say there is another range of 650 to 700. Let us say there is another range of 700 to 750. These are all questions, okay? These are all various types of questions. And then there is a final one which goes from 750 to 800. Now, at any given point, just assume that a person is going to be in one of these 4 buckets, correct? Is going to be in one of these 4 buckets, and if they get less than 40% accuracy, okay, less than 40% accuracy, they are going to be demoted to a lower bucket. So let's say this guy is on a 700 to 750 bucket, he will go down to a 650 to 700 bucket. If he gets more than 60% questions right, GMAT algorithm will think that he's probably better than, that particular level. So he's going to get promoted, upgraded to the next level. Okay. And guess what happens if he gets between 40 and 60%? If he gets between 40 and 60, well, no prizes for guessing. He's going to remain in the same bucket. Okay. So I'm just giving like 3 possible scenarios. Now let us say A and B were to take the test, and let's say it's verbal, correct? And let's say they start off with the first 6 questions, okay? A gets 3 right, B gets 4 right. Let's assume both of them are in this 600 to 650 bucket. What will happen? A will continue to be in this bucket because he got 50% of the questions right. But because B got 2/3 of them right, B moves to the next bucket. Okay, so B now goes to the bucket 650 to 700. Now let us take the next 8 questions in a row. The next 8 questions, let's say A again gets 50% of them right, which is 4 out of 8 right, and B, let's say, gets 6 out of 8 right. What will happen to A? A will continue to be in the 600, 650 bucket. B will get promoted to the next bucket, right? Now let's assume that the next 10 questions, right? A gets, again, A is very consistent, always gets half the questions right, half the questions wrong. Okay, so he gets 5 right, 5 wrong, and B gets 6 questions right. What is going to happen to B? B now moves into the last bucket. Okay, now we have already done 24 questions. How many questions left? 12 more questions left. In this, again, A gets 6 questions right, whereas B gets also, let's say, 6 questions right. Both of them get 6 questions right. Now, B is in the 750 to 800 bucket, whereas A is in the 600 to 650 bucket. So the final score may come out that A has scored, let's say, 620 and B has scored 760. Now, if you really think about it, okay, you actually have A answering, just do a math, okay? A has answered 18 questions correctly, correct? Whereas in the case of B, if you look at it, B has answered 22 questions correctly. It is a delta of barely 4 questions. Just 4 questions more B got, but B ended up getting a 760. Again, remember, I'm trying to keep it very simple so that you understand how the algorithm works, right? So what GMAT is going to do is constantly, it's going to give you a set of questions, right? It is going to see, well, how did he do on these questions? Did he do well? In which case, I'm going to promote him to a higher bucket. If he does poorly, I'm going to demote him to a lower bucket. All our lives, we have worked with tests where your score was computed at the end of the exam. GMAT is an exception. In GMAT, your scores are getting computed at every single question. Every single question that you get right or wrong, GMAT is constantly making this choice. Do I keep him at this level? Do I move him to a higher score? Do I keep him at a lower score? Throughout the test, throughout the 32 questions that you're going to be, 31 questions you're going to see in quant, and the 36 questions you're going to see on verbal. Throughout the 67 questions, GMAT is just doing this, right? So a lot of times when students come and talk about accuracy, this is another mistake that people do when they start off that prep, right? They will use words like accuracy. Now, in reality, there is no such thing as accuracy. Think about it. Because it doesn't matter to me whether you got that question right or wrong. What matters to me is also whether that was a tough question or whether that was an easy question. Because if you got an easy question right, it just tells me that, let's say you got a 400 level question right. It tells me that from 400, you'll probably be promoted to a 450, correct? So it also is the difficulty level of the questions, okay? Good. Now coming to the next part. Now, if you remember that we had the earlier GMAT format, and in that early, so just one question, did all of you understand about the adaptive algorithm? Any questions on that? Yeah, so Kavi Mohan had this question, how do you determine which bucket A or B belongs based on which mark? So Kavi, I will explain that to you. It's a very interesting concept if you ask me. I mean, since I kind of get into the depths of such things, I'll just try to explain to you in a very simple way. See, what really happens is, and I'm going to explain this concept of, okay, sorry, I'm just trying to see the PowerPoint went off somewhere. Let me just get the PowerPoint back. Okay. So, okay, all of you able to see this? Now let me just go back and share the, okay. Now, what really happens is, the way it works is GMAT earlier, okay, so when we had 75 minutes, okay, quant and verbal, we knew, okay, this is for a fact, we knew that quant, out of the 37 questions, there were actually 9 questions that were experimental. Experimental questions means questions that don't matter towards your final 3-digit GMAT score. These are questions that GMAT uses so that it can test out those questions and use it in the future. And out of 41 questions, 11 questions in verbal were experimental. These were questions that did not go towards your final GMAT score. All right. So let me just write it over here. Experimental questions. Okay. Same thing for this. So this again is experimental questions. Now, why did GMAT give so many experimental questions? GMAT basically said, I want more questions that I can use because there are so many test takers taking it. So they said, can we have like a, more, can we have more questions that, probably we outrun these questions? Because what happens in GMAT is every time a question is shown, okay, I'm just giving you some internal workings just so that you appreciate how it works. Each time a question is shown on a screen to someone somewhere in the world, correct? Let us say there is a guy taking it in South Africa, right? He sees a question once on a screen. Whether he cancels a score, whether he scores a 760, whether he scores a 550, doesn't matter. That particular question has one exposure. So it's in the number of exposures, like it has been exposed one time. Now, internally, for all the questions, GMAT has a cutoff. Okay, exactly, we don't know how much it is, but we believe it would be at least a few thousands, right? Maybe 10,000 times a question is seen, or 5,000 times a question is seen. GMAT says, I will not show this question anymore. And what GMAT does is GMAT retires that question. And in its place, you're going to get new questions, right? What are these new questions? These are questions which GMAT has already tested out with the GMAT test taking population. If there are some cultural, biases that the question introduces, that has been taken care of. Statistically, I have data to know how the question is, at what level should I show. So I have already done that research. That research is done on experimental questions. I hope you're clear on that. Okay. Now, what has happened is with the new GMAT, okay, we know for a fact that what is really reduced are the experimental questions, which means that today, if verbal has, okay, 36 questions, we know that 5 of those questions which were experimental have been taken out, which means today we know that out of 36, 6 questions will be experimental. Okay, because 5 experimental questions have been removed. This is something that has been confirmed by GMAT officials themselves. Okay. In the case of quant, okay, now you can imagine it is now 31 questions, which means 6 experimental questions have been dropped, which means today there are only 3 experimental questions. To go back to answering what someone asked earlier, yes, because of this, the number of questions that you can make a mistake on has obviously reduced a lot. Okay. Now, what are experimental questions? So I'll just give you a very interesting thing about how experimental questions are used. Okay. Bad drawing. So let me just try to see if I can draw it a little clearer. Yeah, I got a line. So what GMAT basically did was, GMAT basically said, for every experimental question, right, they basically had 2 points of data. They knew the eventual score that a person got, okay? They also knew whether that person got it right or wrong, okay? Now, let us assume that there is a particular question. I'm going to use a slightly thicker brush over here. And let us say the question went like this. So I'll explain what it is. Let us say that at 600 level, okay, a 600 level, let us say 30% of people got it right. Okay, so 30% got it right at a 600 level. And the same thing, sorry, it's very hard for me to, I'm really sorry that I'm taking time to type because I usually have a bamboo pad which makes it a lot easier. Okay. Then let us say that these are the 4-5 marks I'm going to keep, right? Okay. So let us say that at 650 level, I'm just going to put it over here, 650 level, let us say 40% get it right. Okay, so 650, 40% get it right. 700, let's say 700, let's say 42% get it right. Okay, I'll just do one thing. I'll just try to use the text function over here. So at 700, 42% get it right. Okay, and let us say that at let's say 750, okay, 80% of them get it right. Okay, and let us say that at 780, 82% of them get it right. Now, what you'll see over here is, statistically speaking, okay, once I have gained this much information about that particular question, correct? Now, just think about it. Is this a good question for me to ask someone who's between 600 and 650? Because, 30%, 40% statistical deviation is not that high. What about a person between 650 and 700? It would be a horrible question because whether he gets it right or wrong, I will not really be able to tell you with a fair degree of confidence that he was at 650 level or 700 level, right? Again, 750 to 780, just 2% of people getting it right, right? So very hard for me to see if this question is going to help me differentiate people at 750 to people at 780. But this is a great question for people who are at this range. It's a great question for people who are between 700 and 750 because there is enough variation, there is enough statistical variation for me to say that this experimental question, when I use it in the actual test, I will use it to gauge people who are between 700 and 750. Those who are who are going to get this question right, they are most probably at a 750 level. And people who get it wrong are most probably at a 700 level. Remember, I use the word most probably because it is not just one question. GMAT is going to test your average accuracy over a set of few questions. Correct? So it says that, okay, maybe one question, bad luck, maybe he misread it, hence he got it wrong. Let me give him another question. So it will constantly give you questions that are at a 700 and 750 level. Consistently, you are getting them right. GMAT says, you know what, this guy is more of a 750 guy, not a 700 guy. If you get consistently all of them wrong, GMAT will say, well, this seems to be more of a 700 guy rather than a 750 guy. All right. So that is how experimental questions work, right? This is the extra information that we get from experimental questions. So I just wanted to make sure that I, explain that part to you. Okay. So I hope all of you are clear on this. Any questions? Let me just go ahead and check if you have posted any questions over here. Yeah. So does these experimental score, Shrey Kumar has this question, experimental questions, they do not count. So the questions you're going to see, the 5 and 3 questions you're going to see on the GMAT will not count towards your final GMAT score. Experimental questions are for GMAT to basically, upgrade its own pool, upgrade its own database. Okay. So see, Palantla, right? I've been speaking continuously for the last 45 minutes. When I see a question that says, I'm a bit confused, please come again. Unfortunately, I would not be able to do that unless and until you ask me a very specific question. All right. Simran Ghosh, Does this information of experimental question help the test taker? Anything test taker can do about it? Great question, Samiran. There is no way in hell you're going to be knowing whether a particular question is experimental or not, correct? But the way I would look at it, always remember there are enough experimental questions, correct? So you just need to tell yourself that, hey, if you're struggling too much on a question, just take a deep breath, tell yourself, maybe it's an experimental question, and move on, right? So I'm just trying to explain so that you understand how it means, right? One more question. So let me just go back and try to see if let me just go through the questions. There are some questions regarding MBA applications. I'll take it towards the end. Ankit had this question. Speed is an unsolvable problem. Ankit, really, I've given you the timing, right? The pacing chart. So make sure you use that pacing chart. I hope all of you made notes. So make sure that on the test, you're using that pacing chart. Hopefully that helps you. The second problem could be you're spending way too much time on specific questions that are sucking up your time, correct? You also need to learn when to let loose, when to cut off, when you cut your losses and move on, right? Is it weird that you have 15 minutes in the end? Anonymous attendee, if you have 15 minutes in the end and you're scoring 800, nobody has a problem. The problem is if you have 15 minutes in the end and you are scoring poorly, which means you are actually rushing into an answer without thinking through, right? So my suggestion is, if you're doing well, then there is no problem. But very clearly, since you're attending the webinar today, it means you probably are struggling somewhere. So in that case, stop, slow down, see if there are any pitfalls. Many GMAT questions also come, the way it is, you pretty much will have, all these decoys, all these traps, which you will not be able to see unless and until you think through. Okay, so just be careful on that. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be giving you a personal brief of what we have been doing. Just go ahead and look at the webinar so far. Okay. Anisha mentioned accuracy percentage is of number of questions we attempt out of. Anisha, I just gave an example, right? You understood the overall intent, correct? What I told you was not obviously the official stance. See, the actual test is created by statistician, right? It is using a 3-point variable parameter algorithm. So it's a lot more complex. I'm just making it very simple. The percentage is of all the questions, not of, it's of the people who attempted that question, right? It is not of all the questions, it's of all the people who attempted that question. People who scored a 650 ended up getting 55% of it right. So 55% of people who scored 650 get it right. 70% of people who got 700 get it right. People who eventually score a 750, 85% of them get that question right. So that is how we basically look at statistics for each question. All right. Is it true that you get penalized more for successive wrong questions? It's true, right? So what happens is GMAT is a self-learning algorithm, right? Which means that with each progressive question, it is going to alter. So for example, you get a bunch of questions wrong. GMAT is going to say, I probably thought this person was at a 700 level, but she's getting all these questions wrong. Probably I should just, kind of get it down to, let's say, a 650 level. So getting consecutive mistakes is obviously something that we should try to avoid. But really, is it possible for you to avoid consecutive mistakes? In fact, I would ask you another question. Is it even in your control to know whether you're getting a question right or wrong? Just do that in practice. Questions that you are very confident about, you will end up getting them wrong. And questions that you are not very sure of and you just made an educated guess, luckily you will find that you would have gotten them right. Okay. So I don't think that, you can really assess whether you're getting a question right or wrong. All we need to make sure is we get as many questions right as possible. Okay. Just a request, if you could just stop posting the questions now, because I'm getting a lot of questions, and then what will happen, I'll just ignore the questions. I'll just go back to the PPT. So, just hold on to your questions for some more time, and then I'll get to it. Mayur Pandey, what is the time penalty? A, B. Why are you even considering that A should not complete the test? See, I'll tell you something. A lot of things written on GMAT Club, and there are these blogs. It's all bullshit. Okay, you have to complete all the questions. If you are looking at a high score, don't even entertain the possibility of you not completing the test. Correct? So matter closed. I mean, don't even ask me that, because you need to answer every question. You are into your prep zone. Why are you even thinking? If you did not answer all the questions correctly, cancel your scores, retake the GMAT, right? But for your best attempt, you need to answer all the questions. At how many every questions? Ankit, I just gave a very rough example. It is happening at a dynamic level. So it is not first 6, first 8, first 10. At any point, it's happening at in a very dynamic way. Deepika, does it make follow the guide and other resource with the surplus question? No, Deepika, your preparation would still remain the same. There is no change in the preparation with the new format. Shashank, the experimental questions will have no role to play in your actual GMAT score. Arun, 16th April, which is Monday, is when we are going to be starting off the new format. Till that point, we don't know. There is no way, Palanta, we can get to know whether a particular question is experimental or not. Shrey, answering the first initial few questions is important. So is answering every other question. See, what happens, people say, first 5 is very important, or first 10 is very important. My point is, let us say the first 5 is very important. So what? You know it is important, that means automatically you'll get it right. It is not possible, I'll tell you. If I give you a tough GMAT question, right, it doesn't matter. It is not your intention of getting it right. You have to remember that. It is your ability which is going to get it right or wrong. GMAT is testing your ability. GMAT is not testing your intention. If you were to walk in with intention, everyone will get 800, because everyone intends to get every question right. Okay, but it's not something that you really control. Will getting experimental questions, Parankit, has no bearing on your final GMAT score. Yeah, you get rough sheets. You get sheets along with a marker pen. So that's what you have. 12th May should be enough, Joman. I don't think you need to retake your, rechange your test if you're doing well. I think you have already separately written to prep. So very specific question with regards to preparation, I'm not be able to answer. I'm just looking at some generic questions. Shubham, I already answered it. Cancel the score, retake the GMAT. Because see, you have to understand, GMAT is the most important determinant of you getting into a B school. There is a huge difference between a 680 and a 720, and a 720 and a 770, right? Your scholarships depend. And when I say scholarships, I'm talking about lakhs and lakhs of rupees, correct? When so much is dependent on your GMAT score, why would you accept a score where you know you have not done your best, correct? And Mayur, this is what I request not to post. Please don't post questions saying, please answer my earlier question, right? I'm just helping through, going through all the questions, so I'll answer through it, okay? Pooja Verma, what if by any chance initial questions go wrong? Pooja, let's assume you get the first few questions wrong. Get all the other questions right. The algorithm will adjust itself. Trust me on this. Okay, so you're not going to be stranded at a 500 just because you got a couple of more questions wrong. Yes, over a long, like, in the general sense, it will be, detrimental. It may not help you get a higher score, but definitely you can make up for it. Okay, I don't know what it means. What do you mean by follow the flow? But I would imagine the answer is yes. Parankit had another question. Will getting experimental? No, it will not help. I already answered this. I've already answered this, Shrey. Getting an experimental question has no bearing on algorithm. Okay, so thanks. I just answered all the questions. Let me just move on. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate what we have done so far. Okay, I've answered Understanding the adaptive algorithm, I explained the role of the experimental question. Now let me come to the scoring. Now the scoring range is 6 to 51. Let me also answer the concept of percentiles, okay? The scoring is from 6 to 51, and the way it works is this way, okay? Let me just 1 second. Yeah. Now, what I'm showing is the percentile chart on the GMAT. Now, if you see the percentile chart, the overall score, okay, the overall score is, if you see over here, is, as I told you, from 200 to 800. Needless to say, 800 is the 99th percentile, 750 is the 98th percentile. So these are obviously anywhere in 750 to 800 considered a great score. 700 you see over here is the 80th percentile. So a lot of people consider 700 to be like the mental barrier that they need to cross. 650 here at a 75th percentile. So for most good schools, you are looking at a score of at least 650 and above. When I say good schools, schools that are ranked, let's say, in the top 20, 30 kind of zone. 600 today has become the bare minimum. Less than 600, less than the 57th percentile, pretty much is going to get you dinged at most of the top 30, 50 schools. Correct? So you are gunning for a score which is in excess of 600, possibly 650, preferably 700, and you wish it's more than 750. Okay, but this is the score for IR. So you see a perfect 8 on IR will still give you a 93rd percentile. So you understand how percentiles work, right? So out of 100 people, if you are the topper, you get the 99th percentile. It means 99% of people are behind you, correct? So CAT has this very weird thing, 100 percentile. There is no concept of 100 percentile, okay? So just to let you know. Look at IR, okay? So the funny thing in IR is, even if you get a 5, okay, a 5 out of 6, you still end up getting a 54th percentile. And as I was telling you, if you get a 5 in IR and if you get a 5 in AWA and you get a great GMAT score, that should be enough. You don't need to really worry too much about your IR and AWA scores. You obviously cannot afford, let's say, a 3 in AWA, which means you're scoring in the 5th percentile, right? This is a big problem. Or you cannot score, let's say, a 2 in IR, which means you're in the 12th percentile, right? So obviously, those are scores that are not acceptable. But to a large extent, GMAT, you don't need to worry about AWA and IR scores, okay? Now, in terms of the quant and verbal, you see there is a huge difference in the way GMAT looks at the raw scores. A 51 in verbal, okay, this is verbal, is giving you a 99 percentile. A 46 still gives you a 99 percentile. A 41 gives you a 94 percentile, and so on. Whereas if you look at verbal, quant, a 51 is still a 96th percentile. And here is the funny part. By the time you get to 46, you're down to the 60th percentile. So you must have seen a lot of people, telling you that, I ended up with, let's say, a 60th, a 47 in quant and a 36 in verbal. So what they are really meaning is, I scored a 47, which meant, let's say, a 65 percentile, and I scored a 36, which meant a 81st percentile in verbal. So that is how the scoring happens. Both the verbal and the quant can be taken together. So this is a simple example. So if someone were to come and tell you that I scored, let's say a quant 49 and a verbal 36, right? So if they scored a quant 49 and a verbal 36, add 49 and 36, right? 49 and 36 is 85. So let's see what is 85. 85 is somewhere over here, which means you will get either a 700 or a 710 with this score. Mostly you will get about a 700 with this score. But let's say you get a quant 50, right? And a verbal 42. So let's see, quant 50, verbal 42. The total of quant and verbal, the raw scores, is 92. Let's see what happens at a 92. A 92 will give you a 760, correct? So any score that you take, A combination of the quant and verbal is going to give you the final scaled score. All right. A little bit more into the depth, you will just realize how it is, so different for quant and verbal. So let's take the first one, right? So this one is verbal, okay? And this one is quant. Do you realize what is happening in verbal? All the way till a 45, you are scoring a 99th percentile. Even if you look at it, even a 40 is in the top 10%. And remember, unlike CAT, when you say top 10% on the GMAT, you're talking about the test-taking population, which includes the American test takers. It includes British test takers. So for you to score a 40 in verbal, you are actually competing against those people. Unlike an Indian test like CAT, where when you say 95th percentile, you are actually competing with all other Indians who all have similar background as yours, correct? In the case of quant, if you see, something interesting happens. 51 is a 96th percentile, 50 is a 86th. Before you realize 49, you're down to a 75th percentile. 48, you're not even in the in the 70s. You get down to a 69th percentile, and so on. Why do you think this happens? Why do you think quant scores are really the way they are? Okay, I have a reason for that, and I'll tell you what the reason is. There is a very interesting thing. It's called "How did I score?" Right? This is something that you can actually. This you can do something. In fact, the link is from mba.com. So this information that I'm sharing with you is from mba.com. So let me just show you. Okay. So are all of you able to see the screen that I have? Can you just type on this? Are you able to see the scene? The Chrome browser, right? Okay. Now this is a very interesting tool that GMAT has shared. Okay, so I'll just tell you how it works. Okay, now what you see, this is slightly dated information. Today the things have gotten worse. Let me put it that way. It has not gotten better. It's gotten worse. Correct. Now this is the information for all test takers. If you see on the left hand side, I've just checked all test takers. What does it say? It says that the average GMAT score is 550. Okay, that is the average GMAT score for all people, all countries, all genders, all age groups put together. Okay. Now let us look at how this works. Let me look at the verbal scores. The average verbal score in the world is 29. As I said, slightly dated, but for purpose of conveying the point, I think it's a good exercise. Verbal, the average is 29. So if you get a 29 in verbal, you get a 51. And then you have a 38, which corresponds to 53 percentile over here. Obviously now it has moved slightly more towards the left-hand side. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the quant. This is for all test takers. Okay. Now let me look at United States. United States, right? The world average is this. So the world average is 38. But you look at United States, a 33 is a 51st percentile, which means United States is doing poorer than the world average, right? So the world average is more like 37. US, it is more like 33. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the performance of Indians on quant. Okay. All of you ready? Okay, you can keep the drum rolls. So this is the performance of Indians in quant, right? So you see, Indians are doing a lot better. So what happens now is, a 44 is actually corresponding to the halfway mark, right? So all of you understood how this works, right? So the world average is still towards the left. It is a 38, okay? But you see that Indians are doing very well. But just because you're an engineer, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you are smiling and thinking, see, we are Indians are doing so well. But wait, okay, I have one more country for you, and that country is China. All of you ready for China? Here are the scores in China. Zoop. You see that? In China, right, a 50 is a 73rd percentile. In fact, if you see, a 49 is 61st, and by the time you go to 48, it is lower than the halfway mark. Which means Chinese are doing so much better. And remember, this is slightly dated. Which means today also India, China, and not just India, China. Look at countries like South Korea. All of these countries are actually, Taiwan is better than India, correct? All of these countries are doing better. They are doing so well in quant. Look at it. A 45 in Taiwan is a 48th percentile. It's a 38th percentile in South Korea. It's a 26th percentile in China, right? And in India, it is a 59th percentile. Again, a word of caution, this is the old algorithm. Right now, the things have really changed. The graph that you saw is being skewed even more towards people scoring higher. Okay, so I'll just answer a couple of questions that were asked to me at the end. Do B schools in the US take admission directly after undergrad? Technically, yes, yeah, Akash. Okay, the answer is technically yes, but you need to have done a lot more in your undergrad. You just can't pass college and apply. For that, you might look at an MIM or an MIS course. Okay. Someone said, is GRE is also accepted by US? Yes, that is definitely true. GRE scores are also being accepted. Krishna, conceptually between a 50 and 51 in quant, very honestly, it's which side of the bed you get out of that morning. A person who's able to score a 51 on a bad day can score a 50. And a person scoring 50 on a good day can score a 51, right? So there is really no particular thing. I didn't understand what you mean by age barrier. I'm going to skip that question. How exactly scores are assigned? Because for 36 questions, Kavi Mohan, this is an adaptive algorithm. This is not the linear scale. In linear scale, each question is given a particular marks. But on the GMAT, because there is a particular weight also attached to the question, it doesn't go in a very linear way. You don't need to worry about it. If you answer all 36 questions right, you're going to get 51 as your raw score, correct? Keep that in mind, okay? I'm not going to answer questions regarding your profile and stuff. It's not within the scope of what we have, all right? Just wanted to give you a couple of rules as far as GMAT prep is concerned. Rule number one, a lot, and this is one thing that I want you to write down, keep it at the place you're practicing your questions, the place where you're taking the test, and keep asking yourself. If you ask me, 9 out of 10 times, the mistake that I see people doing is they end up resorting to brute force. Indians, I am not trying to generalize, I'm not trying to stereotype, but Indians, have this thing ki, "Arey, kuch bhi ho na, main 100 question karke phod dunga." GMAT doesn't work that way. GMAT is not a question of just knowing theory, just knowing the rules, right? Knowing the theory, knowing the rules is important. It's a hygiene factor. If you don't know the rules, if you don't know the theory, you will not be able to do anything on the GMAT. Let no one tell you that GMAT is a bag of tricks, correct? But along with all those rules, you also need to worry about applying it onto GMAT questions. Your biggest problem would be this. I know the theory, but the question is constructed in such a way that CR question, I'm reading it, and I'm not even able to understand what the stimulus is trying to tell me. And I have students come and tell me, "Arun, I read the stimulus. I was not able to understand. What do I do?" You know what I tell them? Make an educated guess and move on. Why? Because you're not able to understand the stimulus. I mean, what do you expect me to say, right? GMAT, if you have solved questions, you'll realize is going to test you a lot on these kind of things, right? It's going to test you on whether you are able to take that concept and put it in a real world scenario. And finally, all of it is fine. You may know a particular concept, you know how to apply it, but strategy such as timing, guessing, they play a very important role. So what is the point if you are getting a question right in 5 minutes? In fact, here is some food for thought. I'd rather get a question wrong in 20 seconds than get it right in 5 minutes. Why? Because if I get a question wrong in 20 seconds, at least I'm able to save up an extra minute and a half, which can be used for another question, right? But if I'm spending 5 minutes, whether I get this question right or wrong is immaterial. I have wrongfully robbed a question of its 3 minutes or its 2 minutes, right? So it's very important that you keep timing in mind. So whenever you're solving questions, ask yourself, is this a mistake that I made because I did not know the underlying theory? Maybe my conceptual clarity on inequalities is not very good. Maybe permutation combination requires me to, kind of revisit the lesson. Maybe in critical reasoning, I'm not understood the concept of the 100% truth rule in inference. Whatever it is, get into the depth of the theory. Once you're able to do that, look at the second reason. I knew the theory, but somehow when I look at the question, all the theory flew out of the window. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you have faced this, right? It just goes out, you don't know what to do. Well, take a deep breath, ask yourself, if I were to see this question on the GMAT, how would I go about solving? I think the mistake that people make is they try to see, how do I solve the question? Do not look at how do I solve the question. Always ask yourself, how do I get to the right answer? Solving the question is not important. Getting to the right answer is. And whatever I'm telling you is a very subtle shift in thinking. And I want you to, it's food for thought. Okay, I'm going to repeat this again. Do not solve the question. Get to the correct answer. Okay, what I'm really saying is you can get to the right answer even without solving
it's
it, or
12 o'clock.
even without knowing exactly how to proceed on this. Correct? Or you could look at it and say, strategy wise, could I have done something? Could I have guessed it faster? Could I have optimized it? Right? These are the kind of questions you need to constantly keep asking yourself throughout your prep. Okay. Second, you saw how how accurately calibrated the GMAT algorithm is. Correct? Now tell me, you saw the numbers for China. You mean to say that all these Chinese, they are naturally gifted? Or Indians or Taiwanese or Koreans for that matter? Do you think we are all gifted, like we are genetically blessed? No, we are not genetically blessed, because GMAT is not a test of your IQ. This is not a Mensa test. It's a test of your skill. You have to understand that, identify that I'm being tested on a particular skill. I'm not tested on my IQ. Use only official material, because each and every official question has gone through a lot of research, and it accurately reflects what GMAT is today testing you on. Okay, so my big piece of advice, do not touch non-official material, pick only official material, okay, for your preparation. Third thing, make sure that you're not solving questions in isolation. Solving questions in isolation is of no use. It is not going to help anyone. What you need to do is take enough tests. Take one test at the start. A lot of students come and say, oh, Arun, I don't remember anything, I'm worried. I'm saying, Chuma, take a test. See, taking a test is not to check where you are standing. Taking a test is to see whether you understand what the GMAT is. A lot of times we need to know the enemy, correct? So, like the Art of War said, go to your enemy's house, have dinner, have lunch. Understand what the enemy does, what time he wakes up, what time he sleeps. We are taking the test to know the enemy, right? Again, there are plenty of GMAT tests. I will tell you which are the sources to refer shortly. And lastly, you have to make studying a habit. I see people studying like 2 or 3 days, they will study for 10 hours, right? They'll go all flat out trying to cram as much as possible. And the rest of the time, they will complain that they are too busy at work, that they don't have time, blah, blah, blah. But you have to make preparing for the GMAT a habit. GMAT preparation to a large extent is like, you would have probably heard of this Japanese concept, right? It's called Kaizen. Kaizen is continuous improvement. See, GMAT cannot be like, Arey, kal tak I was scoring 600, aaj I took the test and I scored 750. It will never happen. You are constantly making that improvement. If you're a morning person, try to wake up early in the morning, maybe wake up at 5 instead of 6, right? Shower, get dressed. Before you wear your shoes, Just before you leave work, stop. Sit down, spend 1 hour, 1.5 hours, practice some bunch of questions, then go to office. Similarly, if you come back from work, don't immediately hit the books. Make sure that you are able to, give yourself some time, rest it, take a deep breath, eat dinner, watch TV, relax, unwind, then perhaps take a shower just to get you in the mood and start studying for an hour. Make it consistent. Every day, sit for just 1 hour. If you are finding it hard to sit for an hour, sit for 15 minutes. Sit for 5 minutes. Do this. Sit for 5 minutes every day, not 50. And if you're able to do it for 5 minutes, trust me, you just need to extrapolate. You'll be able to do it for, an hour or 1.5 hours as you gain momentum. All right. Just quickly checking, 9 years experience too much for an MBA? No, it is not. People with 9 years. How should we cancel this test? It will be available on mba.com. Can we come back to a question, Anamik? No, you will not be able to come back. You will have to progress. Ria, I'll be answering this question later. Okay. So I'll get to that question. So you cannot come back to a question. As I said, GMAT uses this adaptive algorithm. So each question you're answering, the GMAT is trying to guess what level you are at. So you cannot go back. Okay. You have to mark an answer, mark a response before you go ahead. Okay. What books to do? Well, basically, I'm not going to be answering questions around work experience. So this is just for GMAT. Let's stick to that agenda. Strongly recommend you to get the official guide 2018, the verbal reasoning guide, the quant reasoning guide. It's a bundle, 3 books that you get. Along with these 3 books, if you go to mba.com, they also have something called as a practice pack, GMAT practice pack, which gives you a few hundred questions. Okay. If you were to, let me just go ahead and so if you, I'm just giving you the link. Okay. So let me just give you the link. Yeah. So this is Googleable, but I just wanted to make sure all of you have the link. Okay. Let me just paste it in the chat window. Okay. So this is the link. So if you go to the link, you will see you get all of these over here. So make sure you take it. It also comes with a online version, so you can always get the online versions. But this is the Bible, this is the Gita, this is the Quran, this is like your holy scripture as far as GMAT is concerned. Along with that, obviously the Crackbubble GMAT guides are also available. It's given to our students for, I just put up a picture of the sentence correction guide, but we have guides for sentence correction, critical reasoning, reading comprehension, quantitative aptitude. So we have 4 guides actually. So if you are interested, you can buy those from amazon.com. But for Crackbubble students, you don't need to worry. It's given to you as part of the course when you join for the classroom. For online, all of this is already recorded in the videos. Okay. Now, what test to take? Well, the test to take, I'm just looking at, again, I'm just going to share the link with you directly. So let me just go ahead and, yeah. So if you look at it, you have the test, the GMAT prep exam collection. So you have what is called as exam pack 1 and exam pack 2. Both of these exam pack are also available, as separate tests. So you see this GMAT exam pack, both available at about $50, but you buy them together, you get it at about $90. So like a $10 off on the price. Again, if you look at it, the official guides along with the books are available. So make sure you use the official practice material. I'm not a very big fan of either the IR prep tool or the online quantitative diagnostic tools and all of that. So I just feel, or the paper tests or the GMAT, right? I don't think you need to really worry too much about, all of these, but just make sure you get the exam packs and the official books. All right. Let me get back to. Yeah. What is the study plan that I recommend? The study plan here is a very basic study plan. Let me just look at just. I actually had. Yeah. So this is what I was saying, that for the test, you can take the free GMAT prep software, or you can take the Exam Pack 1, Exam Pack 2. There are some other popular sources like Manhattan, GMAT, Kaplan, 800 score. My only problem with taking a non-official test, as I told you, is A, the questions itself may not be representative of what you get on the GMAT, number one. Number two, the scoring algorithm is also something that you will get only in the official tests. Correct? So make sure that you're doing that, okay? Because according to me, that's really going to be a killer difference between you, practicing, getting the right scores, knowing exactly where you stand, as opposed to doing tests where the scores may actually, mislead you, okay? This is basically a 3-month plan. Month 1 and 2, I would start off with a diagnostic test, right? I would focus on verbal. I'm just giving an example. So start off with CR, RC, and SC. Maybe you do a little bit of quant basics at this point, but really at the end of 1 month, take another test. So you take 2 tests during this preparation, one at the start, one at the end of 4 to 6 weeks. Focus only on verbal, do a little bit of quant, okay? Week 7, 8, 9, 10 level, which is another 5 more weeks. Keep practicing verbal, but now focus on quant. Try solving slightly advanced questions, slightly harder topics in quant. During this period, you may want to take a test every day. Oh, sorry, every week, right? So you probably take about 5 tests. So 2 tests at the start, 5 tests in the middle. If you're a classroom student at Crackbubble, what you'll realize, we actually go through this 3-month plan. Week 1 to 6 is when you attend the verbal classes. Week 7 to 11 is when you attend the quant classes, correct? Week 12 and 13, I'm giving you extra 2 weeks. So once you're done with that, you have taken all these tests, you can practice selective questions in both quant and verbal, right? You want to focus on questions that are on areas that are troubling you. You are going from an improvement mode to an optimization mode, correct? And also focus on areas which are your weak points, right? So you know that permutation combination is something I usually get wrong. Make sure you're doubling down, you're focusing on ensuring that you're able to practice questions over there. And finally, you are taking probably a couple of tests at this point. So you can take, maybe up to 4 to 5 tests even during this period, right? So 1 every 3 days or so. Remember, don't take the test just as a test by themselves cannot improve your performance, right? So make sure that you're taking tests as an assessment tool, right? It is just going to tell you where you stand. Taking more tests will not help improve your scores. So don't go berserk, right? So according to this plan, you have a good 10, 12 tests. You have GMAT Prep 2 tests. You have Exam Pack, as I said, GMAT Prep 2, Exam Pack 1, 2, Exam Pack 2, 2. So you have 6 tests. Each of these tests can be taken one more time, right? You can reset and you can retake the test. There will be some questions that will appear which will look, it looks familiar to you. It's okay. Okay, 1 or 2 questions, if you're seeing as repeat, doesn't matter. Overall, if you are really making a change in your level, you will see that reflecting in your final scores. Okay, that's pretty much what we had.